Dave here, and today we're going to check out the work of Ralph McQuarrie. Now, Ralph McQuarrie, well, he did pass away back in 2012. I would put him in the category of Sid Mead, so they're pretty old school, where they obviously did things traditionally, because that was the only way to make art. And yeah, I would put Ralph McQuarrie along with Sid Mead, and most of their illustrations were done in gouache, and they do have some similarities just because of the way or how the medium kind of limits them, so they have to paint essentially a certain way, so they do have a slight what's the word, they're kind of under the same umbrella. So he obviously does not have an art station, so we're going to check out a few websites like this piece, or this website is from, or this article is from 3D art blogspot.com, and we also have one article here from starwars.com. I think essentially I think you do have a couple of articles where they do feature Ralph's work here, and we're going to be reviewing the art pieces, obviously, of his. And yeah, so let's begin. So here we have, it's a very famous piece of Ralph. It's Darth Vader, I'm assuming, with another Jedi Knight. Fuck me. By the way, if you're a Star Wars fan, I'm not the best, and I'm not very well versed. I am familiar. I have watched the films and shit. But yeah. So obviously a lot of his work is done in gouache, and you can tell just by the way he paints, there's hardly any texture. And yes, the medium itself limits the way the illustration is going to look in the end. And you'll see this in architectural illustrations or fashion illustrations. Whenever they're done with gouache, you can't really do textures with the medium. But what's cool is it shows you that you don't even have to do that much detail. For example, if you look at the background of this whole thing, it's kind of simple, and it doesn't make sense. Obviously, you can't photo bash when doing things traditionally, so you have to focus more, or you have to be more efficient. And obviously with traditional mediums, you can't be wishy-washy. You have to be sure for the most part, so you have to take the thumbnailing, the sketching part seriously, so eventually you won't have to keep going back and forth in your painting process, because you can't really do it in traditional mediums. And I do think the airbrush is often used traditionally when doing not just architectural or fashion stuff, but product illustrations as well. And I do think, or I believe, Ralph did have a background in product illustration. And if there's texture in the end, it's going to be the noise that comes off, or that comes from the canvas, but that's pretty much it. Maybe a bit of pencil texture. If you kind of shade certain parts with a pencil, you can create that gritty look. Like this one is I believe this is R2D2. And this guy, shit, the helpful droid. Oh god. But yeah, pretty cool. You can tell the background, the sky, was done with an airbrush, and everything else was just kind of painted in with gouache, or maybe a bit of airbrush here, especially with this atmospheric dust from the sand. Pretty cool. Now, unfortunately, we don't have like big like high resolution pictures here, so I'm sorry, but I think you can buy a lot of his stuff on Amazon, like cards or like postcards and stuff. So I do recommend you check out his work. It's going to be somewhat different than modern contemporary concept art, but these sorts of illustrations, they kind of started it. Like these people, like Ralph McQuarrie, Sid Mead, even the guy in, what's his name? Shit, the alien guy. He did the alien concept art. Oh god, I'm a disappointment. you'll know him. He does the xenomorph types of very sexually themed artwork. And I think for that guy, for the alien guy, he did use the airbrush a lot. And I don't think he used gouache that often. I think he's more of an airbrush kind of guy. And you can do a lot of details with the airbrush. So it's kind of hard to tell sometimes, just because even the airbrush doesn't have, you can't really make so much texture with the airbrush like gouache. So the only way you can tell is if you zoom in even more when in regards to detailing, but that's pretty much it. So anyway, here we have a nice scenery. It's pretty empty. Look at how he did the textures of these rocks. It kind of reminds me of John Park. Now, John Park likes to be efficient with his brushwork, and sometimes you can see him do some details, and he'll just paint them in. He's not really into the whole photo bashing whenever he does his personal work. That's just kind of his style, I guess. And I do like it, and it's pretty efficient. And you can kind of suggest texture by adding enough strokes to kind of make that thing look like a certain thing. For as long as you know what kind of stroke or what kind of pattern works for that specific thing you're trying to be specific with. Hopefully you got that. Anyway, you'll notice that he does keep the perspective shots rather simple. And this is pretty common for all illustrations, especially when you're trying to design something. It just saves so much time. Doing dynamic shots, there's a time and place. Nowadays with 3D, it's so much easier to do those kinds of shots. You notice this kind of perspective basic shot, say with the work of Feng Zhu, right? Whenever he does his environments, it's pretty simple, not very dynamic, like 3-point perspective types of artwork. If you're going to design something and sell an idea, it's not as necessary. Once in a while, sure, as a kind of entry piece to kind of pull people in, if you're trying to pull people in, right? God, it makes sense. But for the most part, you do have to save yourself or save your time, and keep the shot simple and focus on the design, the atmosphere, the mood. When it comes to storytelling, sure, it helps for storyboards, right? Narrative concept art. Then you can be a bit more playful with your shots, but keep it simple. By the way, doing night scenes in gouache is pretty difficult, but I always thought that the sky would be somewhat black, but they tend to be just blue to kind of suggest the nighttime feeling. But it looks like with this shot, it doesn't seem as realistic, just because it's traditionally done. So it's going to have a bit of that. Not so realistic, but it's not meant to be photorealistic. It's an illustration, and it works. There's a bit of realism, but it's not going to be photorealistic, which is more common nowadays in concept art. Same thing here, stable shot, 1-point perspective here. Everything is being pulled into this 1 point, and they tend to be in man's eye view, where you're kind of the person in front or seeing the whole thing. You're neither down or up for the most part. Now in this case, they're in space. The background is obviously going to be black, but some textures, but they're more like lines to suggest the sci-fi element of the ship. Now obviously the guns have way more detail. Nice highlights here, but again, lack of texture. It's not a bad thing. It has its place. It has a look to it. Now because we have Photoshop and Clip Studio Paint, we can be a bit more playful here. But I do think you can save time by being more, oh, this is a repeat, by being more direct, kind of like, by having the gouache kind of mentality. I remember, I believe I did an art review of McManus, and he did a lot of gouache studies, and I do recommend you check out the video or his website or ArtStation portfolio, and check out the gouache studies of his, because he did like a batch of them, like 2 posts of them. And I do think if you do or have the approach of painting in gouache where you're more direct, it's going to transfer well to your painting, where You're not going to use layers so much. I mean, you'll eventually have to use layers in the digital realm just to save time and be more efficient, and obviously have more effects. But if you have the gouache direct painting kind of mentality, you're going to save so much time. And I do think it's going to develop your confidence way more. And I remember hearing this advice by direct painting from Feng Zhu. He just recommends just painting on one layer and getting that confidence. You don't always have to do it. It's more of a personal thing or a practice thing. But once you get that skill, or once you get used to painting directly over your mistakes, eventually you will master the art of painting digitally. So here we have some stormtroopers. Now in this case, it does have a lightsaber, and some shields. So this is not all concept art is going to appear in the film. It's just going to be more of an inspirational thing or a guide, I guess. But obviously, in the Star Wars world, the swords were limited to the Jedis or the lightsabers, and they did not have shields. The stormtroopers. Anyway, again, very very smooth, not a lot of texture. Adding lines or cut lines is very common in sci-fi art, and it just makes it look more segmented because things can often look too smooth. So adding some cut lines helps add a bit of variety. Oh, here we have a bit more information, especially with the ship design and this character right here. So for this view, you are seeing it from below slightly, kind of like maybe you're sitting down or you have the viewpoint of a child perhaps. But I'm pretty interested on his technique with these lights, because doing this traditionally with an airbrush is pretty, because you have to mask it or this ship to kind of not let this light source affect the ship too much. And obviously it's easier now because we have layers. You can use a clipping mask and stuff like that. But whenever I see illustrations like this, I'm very very impressed, and I don't really have an excuse anymore. Just because, I mean, how the hell? It takes too much time and you have to do a lot of planning beforehand. But yeah, here we have another light source kind of from the bottom. Maybe, I'm not sure. It's kind of yellowish. But again, the shot is rather simple. It looks very sci-fi. But again, not a lot of texture. You can compensate for that lack of texture with more information. Cut lines, details. Not necessarily textural details, but like mini parts or tertiary elements to kind of just make it more concrete. And notice how this part right there has way more information, but in the background it's pretty much empty. So it kind of just fades, and it has that nice contrast of nothing and something, because this one has too many parts in it, but it's kind of balanced out with the background. If the background had more elements in it, it's going to look a bit too chaotic, and you'll see this in contemporary concept art. Just because we can photo bash, it can be overdone. So if you do have a nice solid painting background, you'll know when to just let things be vague, say for the background. So if there's something cool with traditional painting, it would be knowing when to pull back with your details. I've seen this technique, this kind of back and forth strokes, in Sid Mead's work as well. It's just a way to add texture. But you do have to do a lot of like strokes, so it takes a lot of effort. Even the way of painting this glacier ice, I've seen it done by Sid Mead. Because you can only do so much with gouache. But in the end, you do achieve some decent looking results. Decent. Oh, here you can actually see a bit of hue variety. Some blues, some reds, some oranges. Some kind of light green stuff. Some reds. So it does make it look more realistic. Again, it's not photorealistic, but it has realism. So it's more believable. and less stylistic. Nice designs here, a bit more detail. He didn't have to do this in the background. You can see here in the opening of this hanger, the ice parts here. It's he didn't have to detail it too much. I mean, I know it's not that detailed, but he could have just left it as more of a silhouette. But then again, he's kind of skilled in technical illustration, so it's not going to be much work for him, I guess. So here we have way more texture, or the illusion of texture, especially with these branches. I forgot what these are called. They're where the tree is kind of above. They tend to be in swamp areas. They're the kind of tree where you can see the roots. Shit. And I believe this is Yoda. He does look somewhat different here, but the concept is there. Still amazing though. And again, the shot simple. A bit of airbrush work here for the smog. Some eggs or rocks perhaps. And yeah. A bit of texture here for the huts. So he had to go in and just add a bit more detail to suggest that it's handmade. Some greens here, some reds. So there is some hue variety when it comes to the everything, especially in these plant life. And notice how when you're doing or painting with gouache, you can create this texture by just squiggling your brush around from time to time, and it kind of adds just a bit of something. Because again, the medium itself is pretty opaque, and so a lot of your pieces are going to end up being a bit too solid. So you can create that random variety by just adding a bit more squiggles in your paintings. Here we have, he was able to create the illusion of a movement now in our modern world where we have technology. We would just use the blur tool or some blur effects and maybe layer a couple of things to create this kind of effect. But with gouache, with a very opaque kind of way of painting, the way to do this is to be sketchy and not as concrete. Because when things are moving fast, you tend to lose the detail and you can only see the gist of that something. So by being a bit more playful with your brushstrokes, you can create that illusion of movement, of speed, of yes. Here, the background or the stormtroopers chasing this guy, they're pretty much, I'm assuming they're stormtroopers. They're pretty much silhouettes for the most part. And again, the strokes, he did add a few more lines. It's almost like a comic effect where they do a lot of lines back and forth toward a specific point to suggest that movement or speed, because it's hard to create that feeling in a page, in a black and white page, or with a more graphical style. So, but if you do have paint, you can just loosen the amount of detail. Now for comics, it's kind of hard to do that because you do have to be more inky and more detailed. So by just adding lines, I guess, you can create that illusion. But for painting, I'm assuming you want to improve your digital painting skills, just lessen the detail and don't make it as concrete. And you can be a bit more playful. I think it does help to keep the strokes kind of in the direction of the movement, or it goes along with the movement. So that's pretty much my only takeaway from this piece. Ooh, here we have another piece. This time, a snow scene. I'm glad how he was able to create this soft edge here. It's very, very realistic. And even if this whole shadow is really just one big silhouette, there is some value variety. It's pretty soft, and maybe, I'm guessing it was done with an airbrush. Like you can see how this lower part of this mountain is slightly lighter than the top part. So it's pretty realistic in that regard. And even in this part right here, you can see a bit of value variation. It's pretty soft. Again, I'm assuming done it It looks good. And you can see some rust here with these walkers. Wow, butt up. Anyway, so this is this a Star Wars scene? Maybe, maybe not. Now you can tell in the city, the background, the cityscape, it's pretty simple. More like silhouettes, a bit of variety to suggest variety, but that's pretty much it. The sky, I guess, was done with an airbrush. Way more detail in this ship. And again, the view is rather simple. Just a stable shot. Not much information here in this part. So, yeah. Look at how this part here is just black. I guess this part is kind of detailed as well, so it's a great contrast, detail, lack thereof in the background. Here we have a guy with a long gun. I'm not sure who this is, but you can see, I think this is R2-D2 and the golden droid. Nice reflective suggestion here coming from the ground, or the two suns, and then light reflected here towards the bottom of this vehicle. You can even see the highlight strokes from the gouache in this part. Very cool. I do also recommend seeing Sid Mead's work because they have the same kind of approach or a similar approach. Here we have this. I forgot what this was called, but it's where these little people live. It's kind of a moving castle or tank, and they're like they steal stuff and sell stuff at the same time. I'm not really sure how it works, but yeah. Oh, their work, or Ralph McQuarrie's, or not just Ralph McQuarrie's work, but Sid Mead's, like both of their styles do remind me of a modern concept artist by the name of, his name is Martin, I believe it's Martin Deschambault. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. I believe he's German. They have the same style, right? Now obviously he does use Photoshop, so there's going to be a lot of layer effects and stuff like that, but he knows how to paint directly, and you can see it in his video process videos. So there is a nice bridge there, and I do believe that he is influenced by, if not Ralph McQuarrie, Sid Mead. I mean, who isn't nowadays? Especially with this whole sunset part, he likes doing sunsets or sunrise, sunsets types of views, and he likes to keep the shot simple because he does do a lot of design stuff, so he wants to save time obviously and make the views less dynamic and just keep it simple. Let's go back. I do like how this part is purple, this part is kind of red, so cool, warm. There's a lot of back and forth between the cools and warms. The items are usually in the cool part because they're kind of metallic, but they're kind of complemented with the sand in the bottom. And the light is obviously coming from this side, so everything in this side is going to be somewhat reddish or yellowish. You can see it in the rocks, in these thingies here, and then some bluish in the shadow parts. Blue. Now this blue is a bit too light, but it's more of a stylistic style, or stylistic. It's a stylistic choice, and it looks good. So hey. So here we have. Oh, it's more accurate this time. The design is pretty close to the actual film. Oh, I believe this is a... I'm not sure what this is because there are modern cars here, or kind of modern, I guess. This could be like a festival poster promotional art, maybe? Who knows? But it's way more detailed, looks cool. Oh, there's a bit more texture here, so he had to go deeper with the gouache. Especially when it comes to these scratches here. Damn. And whenever you're doing flat stuff in sci-fi, you can just change the hues or create panels to create that variety. Because it's going to look somewhat boring if it's all flat. And lots of beveling involved, or some subtractions here and there, some dots or nail bolts to just add a bit more oomph. Here we have an architectural scene. I believe it's for Star Wars. I'm not sure what this is supposed to represent, like what city this is, but Tatooine? No, it's not. The Tatooine is the desert thing, right? Anyway, again, the shot is super stable, pretty simple. The background, they're just a bunch of silhouettes with some lights here and there. Most of the detail is going to be in this part right here. So I think it did rain because you can see some water stuff here, or water puddles. So it does have that sense of realism. And he did have to paint the reflections, because in Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint or any kind of modern program, art program, you can just copy the top part and just extend it down. You can save so much time nowadays. Here we have, I forgot the name of the ship. It's by, oh god, not Mando, Han Solo. I think it's Han Solo ship. So here we have Chewbacca, and he does have black hair here, and the this golden guy, the awkward droid, and of course R2-D2. Oh, he was able to add some texture here in the ceiling. I'm not sure how he did it, because it seems slightly painted, but it has that fade out effect. So I'm not sure how he did that. Yeah, even in these holes right here, the way he did the rust, I'm not sure if it's gouache. Because with gouache, you have to be, it's going to look way more opaque. So anyway, let's go. Look at how this hole right here has that value or light gradation. It gets lighter here and darker here. It's not just one big black square. Again, more realism in his work. Some bottom lighting coming from the sand, so you can see a bit of yellow in the bottom. Now this ship does have, or it's highly exposed, or there's high exposure, so the top part of the ship is going to be mostly white, and it's a bit too bright, but it makes sense. It's probably like 10 a.m. So the sun is pretty high. And it's nice being able to draw figures from this level without too much detail. I'm still having trouble painting smaller figure people. And how do you simplify the amount of details, or lower the amount of details, while still making them look like actual people? Yeah, lots of rust. It's pretty broken, pretty old, but looks amazing. Lots of detail here. Cool stuff. I'm not sure where this is, but the clouds are obviously a bit more stylized. It's not exactly realistic. It's a bit too diagonal, but it makes sense. It still has that cloudishness to it. It's very, very soft, puffy, poof, poof. Lots of lighting. It's kind of sunset here, or the sun is setting, so makes sense. Here we have a racing shit. It's from the first Star Wars films. I wasn't raised with part 1, part 2, and part 3. I was raised with the or 4, 5, 6 rather. I was raised with the prequels, so it's hard to relate to the first 4, 5, 6, to part 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I believe I was actually more into the Clone Wars. Like, that's what I did watch, obviously all of them, but I'm more familiar with the prequels, essentially, where we have the where it looks good, better. I actually like the prequels way more than the sequels, just because it's more. I was raised in it, so it makes sense. Anyway, so this guy's falling, this guy's falling. So they're fighting, obviously, trying to. I forgot the meaning of this scene, but it did happen in the film. Again, with the strokes, back and forth strokes for the sand and the shadow part. The way he did add the texture here for this architectural piece, I'm not sure how he did it, but it looks good. Compare that to the sand. The sand part is pretty simple, not a lot of texture, a bit of lighting variation here. You can see some reflected lighting, so there's a bit of realism, but the textures do happen more in this part. And being able to create soft gradations of values in gouache, it's pretty difficult because you have to do it slowly and do a lot of mixing beforehand to create that soft fade of values. I'm not sure where the green is coming from. I would expect it to be a bit more orange or yellow. Or maybe it's just from the actual ship, maybe. Or maybe because it's blue. It's kind of blue, but because of the yellow, it makes it look green. Ooh. Ooh, I'm pretty smart. Fucking genius. Anyway. Here we have a more dynamic scene, because it's obviously a fighting dogfight scene. Here we have the X-Wing with the bad guy ship. I'm trying to create or recreate the sound, but looks cool. I would expect him to be a bit less detailed because it's a moving scene, it's more of a keyframe. So I'm surprised that he did keep it clean, because whenever you're doing moving types of shots, you do have to find a way to make it feel like it's moving, because if you keep everything detailed and clear, it kind of takes away from that movement. But I guess it makes sense if you're doing these sorts of illustrations. You have to be clear anyway. Well, nowadays you don't have to be, because a lot of keyframe art, you can be a bit more playful with the blurs, with the fog, with the explosions and stuff. But you're going to be limited when doing, again, gouache, traditional illustrations. Lots of detail here, cuts and stuff, bevels, nail bolts and stuff. The blasting stuff, or lasers. Not much to this scene, but yeah. Yeah, this ship is pretty weird. I'm not sure where this is from, but it looks amazing. Yeah, the background is just black with some white spots for the stars. A bit more hue variety with not just the ships, but the main ship. Whatever this ship is. I can see some greens. I'm not sure maybe if this is a scan perhaps, and maybe that's why there's a bit more hue variety. I'm thinking it's more of a scan, maybe. But what I do know, it's less, like it has more grit. Like this painting has more grit in it. And more hue variety. And textures, even textures. I can see some purples here, some yellows, some reds. So it's never going to be one solid color. It's going to look like one solid color, but if you zoom in, there's going to be a bunch more variation in it. Still often in the same family, but it's going to be there. Maybe he did use watercolor for these sorts of splatter effects or rust effects. It's hard to say. Looks cool though. Here we have another shot. It's not exactly simple. You're kind of seeing it from above. But notice how it's not as skewed. It's almost somewhat... Now this one is kind of more perspective-ish. This one obviously does have perspective, but it's a bit slightly isometric. It helps to save time. And if you're trying to show design, you can be slightly more isometric with it. Detail, the background is kept simple. I believe these are... I'm not sure what these things are. Are they smoke or something? Hard to say. You can see the main warships here. Dun, 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 dun. And here we have a snow scene with a walker, and I think his X-Wing just got shot down and now he's trying to run away. Yeah. Unfortunately, again, it would have been better if we had high resolution paintings of his paintings, or high resolution images of his paintings, but we're going to be... yeah. But the point is, if we're going to end the video, I want to pick a nice photo, maybe this guy. So I'm going to link, by the way, this article, Ralph McQuarrie's most memorable masterpieces, because they do talk a lot about some of his pieces, where they go into the story behind some of these paintings. Oh shit, I forgot this piece. And this piece. So here we have a 1 point perspective. So I think this guy is pretty close to finishing or ending this whole Death Star, if I remember. The background, he did have to keep this whole, like these panels rather simple. Maybe it's not, I don't think it's because of the design, but I think it's more of the blur effect happening. I think so. And then we have this guy. Now this one is more dynamic. Look at this smoke here. Like the explosion, it's way more yummy to look at. Less detail here, more foggy, more airbrushy. It's somewhat blurry, but it does get sharper in this part, in the actual explosion. And the scene is from below, worm's eye view. Pretty cool. It has a more cinematic feel. Even in the way it's painted, it's almost like a 2.39:1 type of ratio or aspect ratio. It's very, very longitudinal and cinematic. Lots of detail, very, very sharp details here. Amazing. So I think we'll end the video here. So hopefully you learned something from this video, and I do recommend you check out Ralph McQuarrie's work. I will link this article and this review of some of his work as well from a certain blog spot. So hopefully you learned something, and hopefully you're inspired to paint as well. And try to be more direct with your painting approach. And because once you do that, you can be a bit more playful, and you can mix that direct painting approach with some of your digital modern Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint or any kind of art program techniques. So keep drawing, keep painting, keep learning, and stay free.